Welcome aboard all. This week I've got a special guest, Tony Cook, who is the editor of Model Railroad News Monthly and also the HO Collector Quarterly. We chat about his vast collection of vintage trains and how he researches and documents them with White River Productions. Also, we may have a little chat about the one Lionel strain, so look out for that one. For those who don't know me, I'm Daz from Model Railroad Techniques. Our YouTube channel produces primarily video podcasts showcasing modelers from around the world, and we have a few how-to videos in there for good mix. If you know of a modeler that might fit the bill and like to chat with me, email me. The link is below. Don't forget to subscribe to keep the content rolling. Also, I have a Patreon page. Any little bit counts. So without further ado, let's get started. Welcome aboard, Tony Cook. So thanks for coming along this evening and chatting to me on Model Railroad Techniques.
Hey, thanks for having me. When you first asked, I thought, well, I don't know what I can talk about because I don't have a model railroad that I don't, but I've been a model railroader my whole life. So the more I thought about it, and as we kind of exchanged emails, I thought, well, let's give it a shot and see that it will be something different and interesting.
I'm predominantly I do speak to people with big model railroads, but I think everyone who fits in with this niche or within our hobby, I suppose, has varying stories to tell, and I think it's fascinating in itself to hear what people are interested in. That's I think Lionel on his AML sort of coins the phrase very well, just getting to know the people within the hobby. I think that's it's got a lot to say why it's going so strong. So obviously you can be found, you're another one of these gentlemen, it can be just about found anywhere. Tony Cook, you got HO Train Resource Facebook page. I will put links to that below. You also www.ho-scaletrains.com. You can also be obviously emailed White River Productions, which is the website. You're also the editor of Model Railroad News, which is a monthly magazine, and also the editor of HO Collector, which is quarterly magazine. I think I've got most of them there. So unless there's anything else you can add there, Tony?
I think that's most of the marks. I'm co-editor of HO Collector. I do that with a good friend of mine, Tony Lucio. So we
Sure.
have two Tonys at
Two
HO
Tonys.
Collector,
Lovely.
and we're both into old HO trains. And he's in Kentucky, and I'm in Missouri. But we met up almost 20 years ago because of my HO Scale Trains resource that he'd email me with some questions on some older models, and we kind of struck up a friendship. And then as things have transpired with me work-wise as I got Model
Sure.
Railroad News magazine, and then when we started HO Collector, Tony's participated in those with me as well. So, and yeah, Model Railroad News monthly that's been around for 25 years.
Wow. Yep.
White River has owned it for about 10 years, and I think June of 2021 will be my 10th anniversary
Yeah,
as
nice.
Model Railroad News' editor. And HO Collector Quarterly is now in its fifth year, and the HO Scale Trains resource, it's hard to believe, but it's 20 years old. That
Wow.
and I merely started it because at the time, 1999, 2000, I think I started it in mid 2000 out of a frustration for, look, there's all these websites with all this great information. Why isn't there something out there with a lot of old model train stuff?
Yeah,
And it's
sure.
like, well, I'll just start one until there's a better one or someone else does it right. And then it just kind of got bigger and bigger. And
Yeah, sure. So I suppose my interest in obviously model trains is very, very different to yours, which is I think this is why model trains are so great as a hobby. So it makes obviously people. Let's liken this to people that are into cars, modern cars. There's also people that are into you know not so modern cars or retro type cars, or even cars of the yesteryear of early 1900s type, what we call old bomb cars in Australia. So to coin a slang phrase here. So what's your fascination with sort of the older model trains and the research behind the companies and the like?
it all kind of just started about 25 years or so ago as I started going to train shows more. And as a lot of those things kind of aged into where they became vintage, because I grew up with a lot of these things. So they weren't old then, of course. They were, new in the 70s, 80s, and whatnot. And sometime in the mid 90s at some train shows, I started to see some old Bachmann items or AHM or Tyco items and think, oh, that's neat. I never had one of those. Let me pick that up. And then it kind of leads to that. Well, I seem to remember they made this or that, or this looks different than I remember it was. And I started collecting catalogs and old back issues of like Railroad Model Craftsman and Model Railroader and going through those. And the whole history part of the hobby suddenly became more and more interesting to me to where it really kind of took over. And now documenting model railroading's past, predominantly HO is my interest, and then covering news of now for model railroad news really kind of feeds on both of those things. So I'm
Yeah.
kind of covering history as it happens, as new stuff gets announced for the hobby with the monthly magazine. And then I'm always kind of doing archaeology work on, oh, I finally found this or that, or this old, catalog or an example of something. And the,
Yeah.
the hobby's history is so interesting in that I kind of have a joke that I say that almost no tooling gets done once. It
Sure.
never goes away. Somebody else buys it, or somebody makes a change to it, or that's the same model this company had, but they did this or that to it. So it's really a fascinating thing. And I do get letters on that from people saying, oh, I wish you'd take like this Alco diesel and go through all the different companies that offered it because I know there's got to be oh yeah there are and I'm working on that
Yeah.
it's fun to get that kind of feedback from people to know that oh they're that's of interest too. Yeah.
Yeah. Sure. So, is there a lot of information online for the research you're doing, or is it a lot more grassroots, sort of what I'd call research, where you actually got to get out into more the archives? Obviously, you said you've got quite a number of magazines, or catalogues from yesteryear as well.
There's more online certainly now, and it always seems to be getting a little bit better. But then, frustratingly, there's a lot of things that I don't feel like are as well documented. Or I will do a Google search and go, "Oh, that's a great picture." Look, and then I realize, "Oh, that's a picture from my website." That's like, "Oh, I thought this was maybe somebody that had
Yeah.
something that I hadn't discovered yet." And it's like, oh, that's just mine.
Yeah. Sure.
So no, a lot of it is the way I find it again is going through old magazines, collecting the catalogs, and just kind of collecting samples of everything. That one of my goals is I basically won't turn away anything I don't have a sample of, like, oh, I need one of those because I don't have that.
Yeah.
And then
Sure.
as you kind of put all those pieces together, it's interesting how puzzles kind of start developing of, oh, look how all of this tooling is similar. And then you'll find out from somebody, oh, the guy that did that also worked for this company. It's like, oh, that's why those look the same, or
Yeah.
that's why this kind of hung around. So it really becomes fascinating.
Yeah, I can definitely see how that would just the whole backstory, just whether it's model trains or whatever your hobby is, I think is just fascinating. And it's some of the work I've just slowly started going through some of the website that you've got going and some of the background there. You got to be commended, I think, Tony, regarding the work you have done just to bring our hobby together. Because at some stage, these things are quite possibly wouldn't be around if there wasn't someone like you that had the passion to put it in the electronic medium, which is now evergreen content, so to speak.
Exactly. I used to Lee Riley, that was with Bachman Trains for so many years, passed away not that many years ago, and I would talk to him about. He was somebody that had been in the hobby forever, and we'd have long conversations about history and such. And he would say that hey, we've got to get some of this stuff documented because so many of these people now, these pioneers in the hobby, they're passing away. That
Sure.
the hobby that we kind of know, which was injection molded plastic, starts in the 50s. So a lot of those guys that were pioneers of that, again, like Irv Athearn passed away in the early 90s, but there's not that many of those guys still around. And again, once they go, those stories aren't written down anyplace.
Yeah, sure.
And I find that like what we just in a recent HO collector. Um, I don't know if I've got pictures of those of so we do a story on Ulrich, and if you remember those were metal freight car kits.
Sure.
And I started looking for information on that, and of course the name comes from the guy Charles Ulrich, and he worked in a fighter plant during World War II. He did bomb bay doors
Wow. Yeah.
for planes. He designed those. And so once after the war, he got to looking at model train models and realized they didn't have enough working parts. Like, why don't these gondola and hopper car doors open?
Yeah.
And he took some of that, and well, there, what we have up on screen at the moment, there's his Ulrich coal loader with his hoppers. But it's interesting that he just saw a need. He wanted to do this, had the passion for trains, and
Yeah.
got into the business.
Yeah.
And that you still see today. A lot of people that are in business today, it's the same thing. They wanted to make something, or they found something that wasn't available and said, "I'm going to try to do that."
Yeah.
And again, those things are. It's fun to. That's just a fun story of someone deciding, "Hey, I want to get into business and do this."
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. You so many people out there. You exactly rightfully point out, Tony, about they find a what we call a pinch point or a pain point within the hobby or something that doesn't exist, and they transcribe across their skills from their professional life, their job and their vocation into to model trains. If they're not a manufacturer, of course, and come up with some fantastic ideas. And obviously you can just scroll through the internet. It's just thousands and thousands of ideas and examples of just that.
And I assume that that's probably applicable to a lot of things, whether
Yeah,
it's people that design cars or, computer work, other things that they take things that they
sure.
know and apply it to a business. But it's always fascinating. And again, I see the story repeated a lot that, again, it might be somebody that was working in plastics in the late 40s or early 50s and realized they could make you know, structure kits or freight cars and then got into that. So they're fun stories. Those
Yeah,
histories and
sure.
all those people are interesting characters.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So obviously you were born up, sorry, grew up, not born, grew up in the hobby, so to speak, because you had your father worked for Walthers back in the day, is my understanding.
He did briefly work for Walthers in the late
Yeah,
1960s. I grew up in central Illinois, and my dad was both a rail fan, enjoyed going out and watching rail trains, and then was an HO scale modeler that he painted, decal work, did all that. So I grew up in a house that always had trains, and Saturday or Sunday was always a day of, well, let's go out and chase trains.
yeah,
So that
nice.
was always something that I had. And my dad and I still share the hobby today and talk multiple times a week about, hey, did you hear about this being announced, or what do you think of this model and such? So, I mean, it's a lifelong pursuit.
Yeah, that's lovely, lovely. We liken that to my point of having someone that working in such a big company in Australia. We've got like basically a saying that says it'd be like your father working in a pub. So a pub is like a bar or a hotel, I suppose, in your part of the world. So that's how we sort of liken that. So it's quite exciting that that's obviously in that in the blood with you, which is great. So was that sort of the next logical step on that you wanted to get something? Get into a job or vocation within the model railroad industry, like White River, if I can spit that out.
Yeah. It just kind of happened more or less. It wasn't something I went out and pursued. I studied marketing and business administration. I actually, one of my other passions is movies, and I actually was working for AMC Theaters for a number of years. And I had worked in St. Louis and Denver and Kansas City. And when Union Station went through a renovation in the late 1990s, and they brought the station back as a science center, and it had an IMAX theater and traveling exhibits. And then Amtrak came back into using the station again. And Kansas City's Union Station is now it's the second largest in the United States, and in its heyday was third behind Grand Central and Penn Station. So I mean, it's a huge, wonderful facility, and it just recently celebrated its 100th anniversary. But I
Yeah,
was at
lovely.
AMC Theaters at the time, and I moved over to Union Station in Kansas City and was involved with their IMAX theater. And then, oh, matter of fact, it's also a railroad related, venue. And as things went on, I became the marketing person for the station and helped with. We always had an annual display at Christmas time where the volunteers would set up trains of various different scales around a big tree and operate them. And all through the year, you'd have people bring their kids down and say, "Oh, we came down to see the trains."
Yeah,
And it's like,
nice.
"Oh, that's just during the holidays, and we have things set up for the holidays." And so we finally took one of our traveling event spaces and just turned it into a permanent home. And it's the model railroad experience.
Right.
And if you Google Union Station, Kansas City, you'll find its website, and it's a free. It's 8,000 square feet of model trains, and that was really neat to be able to be part of making that happen. Um, And from there, I was actually working part time on my days off. I worked at a hobby shop in Kansas City and did things with them. That was Doc's Caboose in Kansas City. They're still around. And one thing kind of led to another, and I got involved with the magazine. Model Railroad News was offered to me as the editor in 2010, I believe it was, mid 2010.
Sure.
And that's how I got into that. But yeah, it actually wasn't something I went looking for,
Yeah.
that an opportunity presented itself. And
Yeah.
it's
Lovely.
really been, it was one of those things. At first it was just a part-time side job to what I was doing at Union Station, and then it just kind of expanded into, it's like, well, this is really what I'd like to do all the time. And then since 2012, it's been my full-time occupation.
Yeah, lovely, lovely. So, you briefly touched on your collection regarding old catalogs and magazines that had various of American sort of model railroad companies and the like. Do you have physical? Obviously, how extensive is your physical collection? I suppose what I mean by that: locomotives, rolling stock, and that type of thing.
As I say, my goal on that is basically to try to have one of everything that somebody made. So, like
Lovely.
if it was Atherton Blue Box, and not maybe every road name,
Yep.
but like every type of locomotive, every type of freight car, and that has been an ongoing thing now for about 30 years that
Yeah.
I've been working towards that goal. And so, yeah, it's kind of slowly overtaking my house. I no longer have a dining room. I finally gave up on that, and it is now shelving, and it's all, you walk in there and it's, all trains in boxes.
Yeah.
And then my office in my house too is all trains in boxes. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's a big collection, and I tend to get things now. I focus on things that we're either working on for a feature for HO Collector, or if Model Railroad News has a new release of something coming out and the model had been issued, say, 20 years ago
Yeah.
and has had change, like, well, let me get one of those older ones. Like
Sure.
Athearn recently has announced their Amtrak Genesis General Electric diesel is going to come back as a Genesis line model. Well, it was a blue box, and then it was a ready to roll, and they've made upgrades and changes throughout the years. And so when that was announced, the first thing I did is go to the shelf and, do I have samples of them? It's like, okay, I do have a blue box, but I was short like a ready to roll. And again, so I start filling in holes. That way, when it comes out, I can show in our reviews in Model Railroad News, here's what it was like and how it's better or different now. So I tend to buy things or collect things now based on need for, we're working on this story. We got to get every
Right.
version of this freight car.
Right.
So, but it's always fun that, things always strike you, and that's how you find things. You
Yeah.
go looking for something, and an inspirational hit you of like, oh, I completely forgot about that
Yeah.
model. This is something. Let me write that down, or let me buy one of those and let's look at it. I think that'd be a good story. So
Yeah.
there's so much out there.
That's fascinating in itself because that would be really interesting to compare the similar model of yesteryear and as of today, just purely in the tooling and how far the technology has come to from something that's reasonably lifelike to something that if put in the correct scene you can't tell and taken a photograph of, you can't tell the difference between the real thing and a model in some instances.
And that we see, you see that so much that we hit these levels. Like
Yeah.
about 20 or so years ago, the road specific and all the added detail became more of a premium. And now it's a standard. That's expected. You can't release a model that's not accurate with respect to the air horns or the light package. Whereas there was a time when, well, if it has dynamic brakes or non dynamic brakes, that's good enough. This is
Yeah.
how we're going to decide this. And now everything is so road specific that it's fun to see that, as you say, you have those changes, that
Yeah.
we hit these levels where you think, well, I can't see it getting much better, and then suddenly it's like, well, wow, look what's made now though compared to.
Yeah.
And I'm always surprised at that, and we try to incorporate that, as I say, into reviews in Model Railroad News. And I do a column in the back of each month called From the Archive, where I take something that's featured in the magazine and have, like a throwback thing in the back of
Yeah.
it.
Okay.
Like I'm working on January 2021 for new Broadway Limited F units, and they had had F units out before. and they were sold under their Precision Craft name, and they'd been that blue line with sound but no DCC decoder. And again, you start looking like, wow, I'd forgotten all these different things, and the tooling on these new F units is actually different than those. So that's like the 2 pages in the back of that issue show you, like, here's the background on what Broadway Limited did for HO scale F units since they got into the hobby market in the mid 2000s. And again, you wouldn't think that was so many years ago until I started putting that together. And it's like, boy, these are markedly different. They had like
Yeah, sure.
QSI audio back then. And I mean, it's a much different thing.
Yeah, that's definitely right. So, how far do you think we can actually go with this in regards to the realism of a locomotive? I suppose it's up to the human imagination at the end of the day, and how far? Because obviously we've got to a point where grab irons or something like that, they're just getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and they're using different medium to get them to more scale, prototypical. How far do you think that we can actually go with this? Do you think?
I wonder that at times. I have that discussion. My assistant editor, Shane Mason, is an N-scale model railroader, and he's mentioned his idea on that is he feels like HO maybe is going too far, that the
Right.
stuff is got so much detail and so much to it and so fragile. Is it really something that's not more of, a shelf model, and it's tough to operate it? Whereas N scale, even the best of N scale tends to be something that's a little more simplified, maybe because of its size, but also because those guys tend to, I think, be heavier operators. Not that
Yeah.
HO guys aren't, but again, things are kind of made with that philosophy more. So I do wonder at times if we hit like a threshold to where it is so fragile or so delicate that, yeah, realistically, can you put this down on a model layout and run it around without, grab irons falling off of it or
Mm.
damaging it by handling it? So it is interesting to see. And I think the market is always changing, always evolving. So it does continue to get better. But yeah, you have to wonder where that's heading. Same with technology.
Yeah.
I still wonder, like, will we get to dead rail? Will we start putting battery power, in fuel tanks and recharging locomotives and not have to worry about power and track? Like,
Yeah.
will that happen? So again, I think technology-wise is just going to keep changing things.
Yeah, I agree with that. I spoke with Neil Erickson from Hawaii probably a month or 6 weeks ago, and obviously dead rail is something that he's very interested in, and we sort of had a good conversation on how far we think where the dead rail is going to go, and we basically came down once the bigger manufacturers start getting into it, and I think they slowly are, that maybe that is the way forward, because who likes cleaning dirty track? I know I don't on a large layout, but
Exactly. Yeah. Even with DCC, that gets rid of like having to have blocks and all the extra wiring. Dead rail changes the game
yeah,
again. And
correct.
again, the first time, and you think, oh, they won't do that or manufacturers won't adopt that. Well, we had the same with DCC. I mean, at first it was like, well, will they? Or, no, they started making them DCC ready. And now it's a standard.
Yeah,
So things do happen, not always overnight, but we get there. Same
yeah,
as, how long did we endure the X2F horn hook couplers here in the States on our HO models when there were knuckle couplers forever? And yet,
yeah,
finally, at some point there in the 90s, knuckle couplers came to. It's like, well, why didn't that happen years before? So the technology a lot of times is there. It just, the adoption of it can take a little longer. But then that's always part of the fun of looking ahead to the hobby of, yeah, what is next? What's the
yeah,
next thing out?
yeah. That's definitely right there. So, are you sort of the sort of collector in regards to your older trains that they definitely don't come out of the box? So I've got young kids that obviously have playing with their toys, and you're a bit like the prospector from the Toy Story series that definitely kids you're not to play with a toy and it's just pristine to stay into the box. Is that something that you do or?
It's definitely, it's a struggle. I mean, for the most part, I mean, because I do testing for Model Railroad News. That what I have is like a 4x8 setup that I can exchange out for HO scale track, N scale track, O scale track. That I even have S scale loops that I can put that stuff up. We do pull tests with how many ounces can it pull. You weigh the locomotive and get, a call on the efficiency of the motor, the scale speeds. So I operate stuff, but it's always tends to be contemporary things. And really, a lot of the older things, I mean, to be honest, even some of the better things, didn't really run that great. I mean,
Yeah.
it always surprises me when someone will send me an email with like some broken Tyco piece or something saying, "How can I restore this?" And it's like, restore it to what? That
Yeah.
it never really was anything. Like, there's no magic or, what can I do to make this run again? It's like, well, it probably never ran before, so it's not
Yeah.
going to run again.
Yeah.
Uh, and again, at times I do get some of the older stuff out, for fun, but no, it tends to just stay in the box. It's out for photography purposes
Yeah.
and nothing more. Now, newer stuff is the challenge, that I will get something and think, oh, I don't want to open it up, or do I need to buy two of these? Um, I think you see behind me there,
Yeah.
behind on my desk, is a 164th BJ and the Bear truck. I don't know if you guys did you have that TV
Yeah, we
show
did.
where you were?
Yeah, back in the day, we did.
What a
Yes.
classic!
Yeah.
What a classic!
Yeah.
And someone on the Fans of a Modeler's Life said, "Oh my gosh, Tony Cook, did you know there's a BJ and the Bear truck that just came out?" I thought, "Oh, I can't believe it! I got to have
Gotta
one."
have that.
And
Yeah.
the thing, yeah, things like $70. So I did buy it, and I did take some pictures for the guys. I did slide it out of the box, but I still left it on its cradle thing on the base. And I saw a lot of razzing of, "Oh, look at that! He took it out of the box! Oh my gosh!" So, and yeah, and I would like to. So again, I keep thinking maybe I need to buy another one of these so I can have one that I can play with, and
Yeah.
then that one can stay in the box. So
Yeah,
who
definitely.
knows? It's
Definitely.
crazy.
Yeah,
It's
that's right.
crazy.
I'm predominantly into European steam engines, and you're just right. As soon as you take something out of the box with a lot of theirs, like Braha and Roco brands that I buy, you break. Like it seems to just look at it and you break some of the details on it. As you say, maybe it has gone a little bit too far with the realism and usability, I suppose, more than anything. Not so much. But I'm the sort of person if I've got my collection, I like to run it around, and I just got to wear the breakages, I suppose, more than anything. So, but I'm forever finding parts on the layout when I'm cleaning it up and going, what the hell has that come from? So I've got this little bin
Exactly.
trying to find out
Exactly.
what it's come from. So
What I notice is I don't do as much photography. That my assistant editor Shane Mason does most of the photography now for the magazine, but I used to do more, and it would never fail that I wouldn't see it while I was shooting the picture, but then while I'm working on it, like in Photoshop, preparing the picture, I've got a big 40-inch monitor that I work with, and
yeah,
then suddenly you see like, oh, that like grab iron or handrails hanging off the model, or it's
yeah,
missing. Like where? And then I go looking in the box tray. It's like, oh, there it is.
there it is.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
very. So what would be your prized model?
I think out of everything I've collected over the years, it was the cover on the cover of the first HO collector would be the Lindbergh U25B. And why it's of interest, Lindbergh got into the hobby in the early 1960s, as a lot of companies did, and they made a switch engine, a few freight cars. This was all HO scale plastic, and it was kit, but kit to the level of kind of blue box. It was fairly simple stuff, and they sold some
Sure.
train sets. They had shown a General Electric U25B, which was, that was GE's landmark entry into the North American diesel market. And then it doesn't go anywhere. It shows up again about 10 years later, around 1970, with again a promise of, we're going to bring this out. And you
Yeah,
can see
sure.
they actually have a model that, in fact, I think it's a 67 or 68 edition of Railroad Model Craftsman. At some train show, there's a guy holding a Southern Pacific one. It's like, well, yeah, it kind of exists. There it is. But I had always wondered about it, and I ran across one a handful of years ago. It's the only one I've ever seen. It's in a complete box. The box is even all printed with, a lot of times those mock-ups like that have no packaging because it never got that far.
Yeah,
So everything's correct about it other than their drive mechanism wasn't complete. So I think that New York Central U25B is probably I took
yeah,
it to a train show out in Wyoming, or I'm sorry, an RPM meet out in Wyoming where I spoke on old trains. And I had a number of people like, oh, wow, I can't believe that. I didn't know that ever actually existed. Can I pick it up? Can I look at it? That it's a surprise. So I think those things that never were or almost were
yeah,
are always that, holy grail of, oh, here's how far it got, that
yeah.
here's the pieces of what they made. And it's like, oh my goodness. So that's part of that. Again, that's an archaeologic I liken it to that,
Yeah,
that
sure.
you're looking for some lost, strange piece. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm assuming you told that gentleman or that lady in no uncertain terms, no, you can't pick it up and you can't touch it.
No, I let the guy pick it up and hold it. Yes, I
Fantastic.
did. Yeah, I
Yeah.
did. No, I mean that's part of the fun of it. That's the
Yeah.
I don't like that of collectors that get something and then hide it away.
Yeah,
It's like,
sure.
no, I want people to know about it because I want to know about that stuff.
Yeah, good on
So,
you. Yeah, good.
yeah, if you're hiding this in your basement, well, that's frustrating because now I don't have confirmation if like that road name ever existed or did they ever make that as a train set. Like if you got it, don't hide it.
Yeah.
I want to know. So, yeah, it's fun to share and talk about that,
Yeah,
which is
lovely.
why that magazine exists, HO Collector, is to show that stuff off.
Yeah, nice, nice. So when you've done some of your research into some of these older companies like Mantua, Cox Trains, which I'd never heard of before, um, what what was some of the fun tidbits you came up with some of those companies you sort of looked into and go, I really didn't know that. That's quite interesting.
A lot of time there's the connections that you don't realize till you start putting some of the pieces together. Um, like with Cox, they did radio controlled airplanes and like dune buggies and vehicles. And I guess they got the bug, as a lot of them do, thinking, well, we're in the hobby. We should be in the model railroad category too. And they started out with Athearn made trains for them from Christmas of 1971 to 74. So they basically just sold assembled blue box trains under the Cox name, but they were just stock Athearn models.
Yeah,
And then
okay.
in 1974, they do go to Hong Kong for a line of models. And the things you find about those that are so interesting, like I've heard stories that their Lono's Jeep 9 was something that was being tooled by Athearn, or Athearn helped because it is a clone, basically the Athearn model, but it's Lono's instead of high hood.
Yeah.
And then the guy that cut some of the tooling in Hong Kong is also a person that later worked for Atlas in the 1990s.
Right.
And
Okay.
he passed away some years ago.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to see those connections and people that worked, across. And like that's for Cox, I always thought that was intriguing
Yeah.
that
Interesting.
here this guy cut those toys, actually did serious models for Atlas beginning in the 90s.
Yeah. I remember growing up as a kid, and I'd ask yourself because my good friend of mine has still got one of these. Did Cox ever get into? He had like a stationary steam powered tractor, which actually was steam powered. So you actually fed like
Ugh,
um, a kerosene block, I suppose, into the boiler. You filled up the water, and it actually had a steam power. It had a little cutter on it, or a little chaff cutter, and it was like the whole model would have been a foot in length by maybe
wow.
6 inches high, and it was a Cox brand. I'm not sure whether this is the same company, but just
So
thought whether
I
you knew something about that. Well, they're great little models. So
I'm not sure of that. I'd have to look. Again, it's interesting. A lot of those companies that have slot cars or all these other things, that's just part of the catalog I flip past to get to model trains. So
mm,
I have to at times stop myself or
yeah,
look
sure.
back at, oh yeah, they do make all this other stuff,
Yeah,
but I
yeah,
always get preoccupied with the trains. Uh, it's interesting to see that. And again, the companies, I think it's surprising how for as big as model railroading seems, when you consider there's stuff made in, China, like brass stuff from Japan and Korea, stuff made in Europe forever, stuff made in the United States, that all over the world, yet there's so many connections. And again, as I say, so often tooling that goes all over the place. Like,
yeah,
well, this was in this company's line, but then it moved to here and moved to there. And I think those kind of things, those are always interesting to kind of track down. And that's what I get a lot of requests for, is
yeah,
people
sure.
saying, what's the story about this? Tell me about this company. Who was it? How did it get started? And where did that stuff come from?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
again, we're trying to knock a lot of the big names out and tell their stories.
yeah. Lovely, lovely. So why do you go psycho for Tyco as on your website? Like, what's the thing? Obviously, you get given a bit of a ribbing on the AML about this as well. So why is Tyco maybe not your thing, but you do discuss it quite often?
It was my first website, started out as just Tyco stuff. And
Sure.
then I expanded into, many other lines later. But Tyco was the first one that I did. And I think, Tyco really is kind of an infamous name in the hobby, and it's good and it's bad. I mean, it at one time was the largest manufacturer of electric trains. Um, it starts out as, and Mantua is its parent company, and the like
Right.
metal steam engine kits and things. I mean, it was a serious pioneer in the hobby. And then by the 60s, in the mid 50s, they developed a Tyco name to sell train sets when that became popular. And then they get into slot cars in the 60s. And Mantua actually spins Tyco off, and it gets purchased by Consolidated Foods, the company
Right.
that owns like Sara Lee cakes and things.
Right.
They
Okay.
owned it in the early 70s and moved production to Hong Kong. And that's when things really get crazy with all the like Jello, box cars and C&H sugar hoppers and things like that go. So it really becomes a toy product then, and it loses a lot of credibility, obviously, with scale model railroaders, and the
Sure.
quality of things again diminished quite a bit too. As I got serious on collecting, Tyco had just disappeared in '93 as its last year to have trains, and really my interest in it is a curious one in that I never had the stuff. That my dad was an avid magazine buyer. He always had catalogs for all the different product lines, but in our house, we only had good stuff. There would be
Yeah.
like Athearn Blue Box, Roundhouse, maybe train miniature kits.
Yeah.
It was good stuff. So you'd be sitting here looking through these Tyco catalogs of all these, crazy toyish things. That was not serious model railroading. So other than getting to look at it and
Yeah.
know, well, I can't have that chrome plated whatever toy thing,
Yeah.
that so I started collecting that in the 90s, just kind of out of a, well, I could never have this junk when I was a kid. Dad wouldn't allow it in the house. And
Yeah.
so that, and then it kind of gets it's funny, you find a lot of people that do love that toy type stuff, so there are a lot of Tyco people out there. So
Yeah.
you do kind of get this scratch of the head from a serious model railroader of, why would you want that junk around? Like, if you're a serious eater, you're not having hamburger helper every night
No.
or TV dinners. Like, what are you
Yeah.
doing?
Yeah.
Um, so that it again, it just kind of develops into that, and but it's fun, and it's fun to see all the other people too, and it's interesting how many serious hobby people, and I won't name names, but a number of them that are in the hobby today, when I say, well, what was your first train set? Oh, it was a Tyco Chrome Union Pacific Silver Streak set from like 1979. I'm like, wow. And now you make like some of the best stuff in the hobby.
Yeah.
So, again, it served a purpose, I guess, that
Yeah.
when you pick up those $50 amazing freight cars, that guy's Christmas in the mid 70s might have been a Tyco set, is why he's in the hobby today.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. It's how our tastes develop as we move on through the hobby as well, isn't it? So that's great. So um, we sort of briefly touched on it. With what do you think would be the one biggest advancement in the model railroading world? We'll take out DCC because that's probably quite an obvious one, I would think. What would you think would be probably, if you could put it down to one thing? What would be your example?
I think in recent years, the thing that, and again, as you mentioned, DCC is a landmark, but I think the fact that basically all of the major hobby producers, and here again, I'm saying HO, but it applies to other scales too, because you see it everywhere now. I even see it in like Lionel O gauge will have road specific attributes or variations to models, where again, in the past, one shall fit all. That I think that is such a change, because so often now you take a model out of the box and think, I could have taken this and gone to an RPM meet and I'd have won first prize. People would
Yeah.
have been like, wow, you've put every detail on it and it's perfect. And yet these are just off the shelf models that we can now go purchase.
Yeah.
And again, we didn't have that. So I think, and again, it's a good and bad. It increases, pricing, obviously. It makes them a lot, delicate, fragile. Production is a lot smaller. I see that from people saying, well, it's so hard to find some of these things, or they sell out the minute they come out. And again, they're thinking of that mentality of 30, 40, 50 years ago, where, say, a box car would get released, and that same box car would be available for years and
Yeah.
never changes. This is it. It's a Santa Fe boxcar, and you'll be able to buy it for the next 20 years. Now, the plastic market is a lot like brass was, where it is almost all special. It's a specialty market in a lot of ways. So again, just as brass was one-offs, or we're going to do this, but it's not. There is no such thing as a regular stock item,
Sure.
and it's changed things a lot. I think you have to be a lot more on your toes. There's stuff that even doing the magazine,
Yeah.
I'll realize, oh my gosh, that came out and I forgot to get one. And then
Yeah.
I'm chasing all over hobby shops and eBay, like, I meant to get that. Um, but again, that quality level is just a stunner to again
Yeah.
take a model out of the box now and not say, well, they did a nice job, but in reality, this railroad had different trucks or they didn't have that style air horn, but this is the model it's made. That
Yeah.
no, now things are just right on the money. And
Yeah.
I think that again is such a, and some bemoan that it takes away my, this is, I used to like to take a generic model and turn it into something specialized. And that's true, but so many of us don't have the time or the talent or
Yeah.
the skill level to do it, that to be able to roll something out of the box and it's a show winner of a model
Yeah.
is
Sure.
truly stunning. Yeah, I love that. I think that's one of the neatest things about the hobby now.
Yeah. Lovely. Lovely. So I don't like to sort of dwell too much on current events regarding the world pandemic, so to speak. Obviously, a lot of good things I think have come out of it from our hobby point of view. We got a lot of virtual, shows like this, podcasts, evergreen content on YouTube, and a myriad of podcasts out there, and NMRX clinics and all sorts going on. So, post pandemic, where do you see the hobby going? I suppose is the next thing.
I think, and I talked about this the other night with Lionel Strang, and I don't remember if it was on a podcast or we were just talking, but we did say what you were talking about, how these like Gordy Robinson and Marty Jenkins and those guys with the NMRAX, these virtual events, and whether it's like the things that Train World in New York have done, everybody has kind of clicked onto that. Athens Train Tuesday, Cato has a show that they do now that I think the involvement of the companies,
Mm.
whether it be Facebook or YouTube, and the regular hobbyists, that we get to participate in it too. We can be part of it. You
Yeah.
can do a clinic on the NMRAX. The Amherst show that would have happened in late January of 2021, they're going to have virtual events.
Yeah. Sure.
And again, it's good and bad. Does anything ever replace getting to go through all those trays of trains at a swap meet? Well,
Yeah.
yeah. But also, Amherst is in West Springfield, Massachusetts. Can you go to that? Can I go to that? I've been
Yeah.
there before, but that's quite an undertaking. That's
Yeah.
the other side of the United States. It's the other side of the world for you.
Yeah.
Whereas
Yeah.
now, with the click of a button, it's like, boom, I'm on an NMRAX clinic talking to Gordy Robinson in Scotland, and maybe Marty Jenkins in Australia is
Yeah.
the guy running the show,
Yeah.
running the
Yeah.
electronic stuff. So I think that what we will have going forward is we're not going to lose that.
Yeah.
And I've heard that from other manufacturers and such of, why weren't we doing this before? Like talking with Ken Bianco Jr. at Train World, like the people at Athearn and things, you do hear that of, wow, this is so neat. And this ability to just come onto YouTube or Facebook and have this audience and put this message out there
Yeah.
that, yeah, why were we not interacting more? And I think our hobby in general, I think the stereotypical model railroader is working in his basement by himself and doesn't have a lot of connection. Maybe they have a club, maybe they're an NMRA member, maybe they go to the hobby shop once a week and kind of, talk to the guys or whatever. But now you have that interaction all the time. That you can
Yeah.
go on Facebook. You can say, here's what I'm decaling tonight. Or I don't know how many times I see this. In fact, I just answered one in the last day where somebody had a Tyco F unit upside down saying, if I take these screws out of the trucks, is there something in there that I need to lubricate, or what do I do? And I went and found a YouTube video made by a young modeler up in Canada who takes that power torque drive apart and shows what you need to do to the gearing to try to make it work. And I just posted that link there, said, well, here you go. Look what this guy did.
Yeah.
And I saw later in the day, says, oh, that's perfect. That showed me what I needed, which again, I don't think we had that interaction that between
Yeah.
smartphones and the way the internet has matured now and people online, that yeah, this kind of interaction, we had the hobby and it was great, but it was almost like a secret
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
no one else knows or no one else is here with me. And now it is suddenly this, oh, I've got this friend up in Wisconsin and I know this guy in Scotland and I've got a buddy in Canada. And it's like, well, how do you know all these people? Like, how can they be your model railroading friends? It's like
Yeah.
they're all over the place.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's going to stay with us both from like the manufacturing end. I think you'll see them stay more in communication, and then just as modelers, that
Yeah.
all of this kind of stuff gets a lot more interaction that we never had before. And I think it's tremendous. It makes the hobby spread, and again, it makes the hobby so much more fun because how many of us get into a project, hit a brick wall, whether it's I don't know how to put this decoder in, or I put this decoder in and I can't make it. What am I not doing?
Yeah.
Or those kind of, now you put a post on Facebook, and rather than, I don't know, I threw it in a box and I put it on the shelf, and it's like, now I'm just mad that I spent all that money on nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet now it's like, no, I didn't know, and this guy told me to try this or that, and I got it working, so I went
Yeah.
out and bought another one.
Yeah.
So again, I think the satisfaction level is raised a lot, because
Yeah.
nothing's fun to just do it by yourself. I mean, even to do a Sudoku puzzle, you want to tell somebody, hey, look, I figured this out and I did it in
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
a minute.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
No, I think that's important as well to get the youth into our hobby as well. I'm 45, nearly 46, so I'm considered reasonably young in the hobby as well. But I just spoke to young Drew just the other week, and his video comes up tomorrow, I think, on my YouTube channel, and he's a fascinating young lad. And I think it's important that this hobby, as we're moving forward with the pandemic, I think has everything. It's got the technology, which the kids love. It's got the tactile. You can make models. It's got stuff to build, to problem-solving skills to stretch the mind, so to speak, is what I like most about this hobby,
Yeah.
I think. But I think moving forward, I think it's important that we embrace those youngsters and give them as much airtime as we can,
Oh,
because
and they're finding us, and they're
correct,
finding the hobby. I
correct,
mean, I've done Drew's show twice.
yeah,
We just did a podcast recently with Jason Schrawn that
Sean,
we from
yeah,
Rapido Trains, and we had Drew on. And Drew and I are reviewing. He's going to do his first magazine review with me on some RDC cars.
yeah,
So
nice,
again, yeah, nothing is neater than finding people like his age and such that get hooked on model railroading. Well, my
yeah,
assistant editor that I mentioned to you, Shane Mason's in his early 20s.
yeah, yeah,
And I met him through A Modeler's Life, and I found him on YouTube because I was looking for an answer about something on DCC.
yeah,
And I find this kid, he was like probably 17 or 18 at the time, doing his Brakeman 17 YouTube videos.
yeah,
And he's explaining all this. I'm like, oh, that's exactly what I wanted to know. And then he just, by the way, mentions my grandfather and I just went to this show in Kansas City. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. He's near me? That this kid like is somebody that I could like take a model to and say, can you fix this, or do you know this or that? And we kind of struck up and we go out to hobby shops and rail fanning, and he's assistant editor, on Model Railroad News magazine now.
yeah,
So
nice,
again,
yeah,
and that happened because of the internet. So there are perfect examples of how that is just exploding in the hobby of, well, how
yeah,
else would you have met those people 20 or 30 years ago and made those connections?
yeah, sure. That's exactly right. So, and I think, as I said, I've spoken to Gordy before. I think he's only in his early 30s, and what that gentleman's doing is phenomenal for our hobby, I think, with the
Oh,
NMRAX. And I hope for his point, for his sake, and the betterment of that organisation, that he might pip a few people on the post and become the grand poobah of the NMRA. He's just got so many good ideas to take this hobby and that organisation into the future. I think that seems to be been stifled over the last few years, or number of years, I should say.
I've known Gordy for a number of years, and he's come to Kansas City. I think he was in Kansas City for the national show. Is maybe the first time we met in person.
Yeah,
And Gordy, I think, is just amazing. Well, when the pandemic started, Gordy and I were messaging one morning on Facebook, and he was talking about the NMRAX. This is what I want to do, and
yeah,
this is how I see this coming together. And he basically explained what they're doing. And I remember I said, I'll help you any way I can, and I'd like to participate in it. But I thought, man, I don't know if he can pull this off, or, what's
yeah,
it really going to be like? And then when he did those first few where they were these, 24-hour events,
Yeah.
and I thought, no way. And they really did, and they were fun. They were great things to watch. People loved, participating in them. So I mean, that when I think about that, that's less than a year old, and yet it has become a new standard in the hobby that
Yeah.
he's always having these online things, which again is such a tremendous outreach to
Sure.
get people to do things and then to show off how to do things.
Yeah,
That
definitely.
I love it. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, no, I agree. I've watched a few, and it's probably how I got in contact with young Brad. I think moving forward with him in my part of the world, which is going to be great as well. So, young Lionel Strang, um, very cheeky man.
You think?
At some stage, I would like to get him on my show.
Yeah.
I have a feeling he's a little bit scared of me because I have emailed him a few times, and I'm saying this tongue in cheek. He's a little bit scared of us Australians, I think, because he's always teasing poor young Marty, particularly.
Oh, he gives. Oh, and you haven't seen in person. He's even meaner to Marty.
Yeah,
Marty was at that Kansas City show. Oh yeah,
yeah,
that he's always picking on poor. And Marty's a saint,
yeah.
so I don't get
Well,
that.
that's
Yeah,
exactly right. All
but
Australians
all in fun.
are very, very saintly gentlemen. So, and obviously he's got the people call him the evil overlord. So he's a little bit big bit of gangster mafioso type persona that he comes across. So it's what sort of dirt do you have on young Lionel that you could share with
Oh
us without putting you in a
wow.
position? But
Oh
no, I am putting you in a
wow.
position actually. So
What a question. Wow. I met Lionel through, I think Shane Mason was
yeah,
invited me to be on the podcast with them,
yeah,
and I don't know how many years ago that was. Lionel and I are good friends today. We went last year out to chase the big boy in Wyoming
yeah, nice,
and took my vintage Cadillac Eldorado out west for its first big road trip and had a
yeah,
great time. I don't know. I don't have any. I mean, he's a great guy. I
yeah,
mean, I love when you meet somebody that you think, my gosh, this person could have been like my twin brother.
yeah,
And
yeah,
Lionel, there's a different. I'm 55, and he's a little bit older than I am.
yeah,
But yeah, it's funny how we can almost finish each other's sentences or tease each other on things. That we're the same on music references or movie references or
yeah,
this or that. That it's a lot of fun, and doing the podcast with him, I always enjoy being a guest on those. But
yeah,
he
nice.
would be, the thing that's going to hold you back is he doesn't feel, now he's got a great head of hair, maybe not as good as mine, but he says that he doesn't have a face for doing video,
Right.
which, oh, I can't believe that. But he said, so that's the thing that you're going to have to convince him that he's
Ah,
camera
okay.
ready.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I could just superimpose in post production an emoji, a smiling emoji over his face or something like that. So just have the dulcet tones of one Lionel string that's coming through in the background. So
And
interesting.
that's, I think that the show's incredible. I mean, when you think of a modeler's life, I mean, I saw someone recently left like some negative comment about how these guys just talk about all kinds of things, and
Yeah.
I don't see really what the model railroading part of this is. And a lot of shows are that way. But again, as you say, trying to get that background on people, I think that's part of the fun is, well, we all could just talk train stuff,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's something we know. So isn't it more fun to find out some of the quirky things or listen to us joke around on stuff? And
Yeah.
I think it makes for, if you're just, so many people say they listen to them in the car, they listen to them while they're working on their trains or doing
Yeah.
things around their house, that
Yeah.
I think it's a fun thing of just that camaraderie. And
I
we
agree.
have that. We didn't this year, of course, because of the pandemic, but we have the annual AML barbecue in the Chicago area
Yeah.
at that
Yeah.
railroad park in Rochelle. And what a great time that is. And we've had
Yeah.
people
Sure.
from Europe and other places fly in for that.
Yeah.
And again, it's just fun to get together, and the people you meet. I have so many friends that are due to, that kind of interaction on Facebook and the podcast.
Yeah. Sure. No, it's definitely. I can't even recall how I came across the podcast. I think it might have been through Model Rail Radio, to be quite honest with you. I got some friends here in Australia that helped me with my modelling that were on the Tom Barbalet's podcast when he came to Australia a few years back now. And I think I just came across, like, as you do, you go into Apple Podcasts and, maybe you might like this, and got listening to it and loved every minute of it. I think it's fantastic. So the banter
There
and
was one that I said should be like, this is the tagline, and I'm not going to quote it right, but it was something like, a modeler's life podcasts are like being stuck in the family station wagon going on a vacation you don't want to go on, and you wish they'd let you out of the
yeah,
car, but
yeah,
then you don't want to get left behind and not know what happened.
yeah, yeah,
And it's like, yeah, it is kind of like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's funny. Yeah, that's funny. That's funny. All right, young Lionel, I'm after you. I want to interview you. So at some stage, you will come on here. I will convince you have a face for television, so to speak. So we'll get there. We'll get there. Can't wait. It's funny. All right. So I posted on the Fans of a Modeler's Life podcast Facebook page. I put it out there that I was going to be interviewing the infamous Tony Cook
And how did I get to
coming.
be infamous?
Well, in regards to the Modeler's Life, I think that I did listen to one particular one. I think they actually used the term the infamous Tony Cook. And there's a
Oh,
question down the bottom here, and I do apologise, Ken, Zeke's or something similar. I do apologise for how I've presented your surname. He goes, I dare not ask questions of Mr. Tony Cook. So
I
obviously,
saw that.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you do have a little bit of a mafioso sort of persona to you as well, by the looks of it. So, but there's
For
obviously,
some reason, I don't know if like I'm on some spectrum or what, but between like the way both prototype railroad and model train stuff, and then the same for like old TV shows and movies,
yeah,
that I kind of have that where it's locked in the head. And
yeah,
yeah, so it's fun whenever trivia or this or that comes up. I'm kind of that first person that can say, no, it was this, and this was a year, and then they made this
yeah.
sequel to it, but then they didn't do this, and yeah.
It's funny. My wife is exactly the same. She's just got a mind for the old movies and the like. And now my son, and he's only 9, he's the same. Where, as a family, we digress here a little bit, but getting into the Mandalorian, well, really big time, because we love Star Wars, and we've been watching the how they've made the Mandalorian with a round table with all the producers, and obviously, I don't know her name. The daughter of Ron Howard. Is one of the producers from series 1, or season 1, I should
Oh,
say. And he turns,
I
and his
didn't know.
9-year-old turns around. He goes, "Wasn't she in Jurassic Park, Mum?" And Have you ever
Yeah.
watched Jurassic Park? And he goes, "No." I said, "How do you even know that then?" "Oh, I just do." So it's just he's getting a mind for that as well. So it's quite interesting. So Peter Borchers, which I've got coming on, I think next month. I think. He says, "Why do you love Tyco so much?" Well, I think we've sort of covered that a little bit.
Yeah, we kind of
Why you
talked.
go
And
psycho for Tyco? More
Peter's
because it
got
was
a tremendous layout too. He'll be a
yeah,
great person for you to talk to. Yeah, he's got like modern BNSF in
yeah,
scale.
yeah. I'm really looking forward to it. I've had quite a few nice conversations across at Messenger at this point. Look forward to that. So, Matt Dawson considered a radio show before, or podcast. I think he's also added there as well. So
I
yeah,
saw Matt said that, and yeah, that's in my. When he said radio, that's what I did in junior college and out of high school. Is that I was in radio in the St. Louis area,
yeah,
so I have done radio before. Yeah,
yeah. Nice, nice. And obviously a
it's
very
fun.
very cheeky comment here from Tracy Boyd. What's your favourite soup?
And she gets on me about, because I'm a terrible junk food person,
Right.
you know, and between that and my poor little dog probably has a terrible diet too because of, nibbling on the junk I eat. And Tracy eats well.
Yeah.
She's always showing me pictures of, I had this or that with them. I'm like, oh my gosh, you let Brussels sprouts get onto your plate.
Yeah.
Have you got no ability to keep those out of your kitchen? Why do you even buy
Yeah.
those?
Yeah.
So I tease her a lot because she eats healthy and I don't.
Yeah.
But she's always trying to get me to try butternut squash soup. And I said, you can put butter and nut ahead of squash and soup, but I'm still not going
Go.
there.
Yeah.
And so that's my challenge from her, is I have to eventually break down and try this.
Right.
And I will. But I think that's why she wanted to know what my favorite soup is. But
I'm
I
assuming
will say
that's
butter. I'm going to say butternut squash soup is my favorite, even though I've never had it, just to appease her.
and never will have it by the sounds of it. So
Yeah.
we got a saying in Australia here: you don't make friends with salad. So that's
Yes, sir. Amen. Amen.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, is that one of the reasons why I think some of the things I find quite amusing, like I think they came from Amazon, rather large drums full of what we call cheese balls. I think
Yeah.
she got the first one, and it seems to be the mascot that seems to be going around a different railway right of ways of recent times. So
We do tend to do that. That tends to be something in the kind of our group of
yeah,
folks. Yes, and Lionel won't admit to it,
yeah,
but yes, I think that I got my tub of cheese balls. That yes, he does. Occasionally, you will open an Amazon box thinking, "Well, what did I order?" And it's like, "Oh
yeah.
my gosh, there's a huge barrel of cheese balls." So,
So there is dirt on
but
one Lionel. So that's great. So
yes,
that's great.
I'm going to say it's him.
Yeah.
There's my conspiracy theory that you
Right.
need to find out, is that true? I
Okay.
think they're him.
Okay.
Yeah.
I might ask him the direct question then. So, being a police officer and all, I'll put the screws on him, so to speak. So,
There you go. Yeah.
all right, Tony. Thank you so much for coming along and chatting with me. We've been going for near on an hour here. It's been a
Wow.
fantastic, awesome conversation about you as a modeler and your interests and everything in between as a person. It's been really great. So, thank you so much for chatting with me on
If I
Model
can
Railroad Techniques.
if I can give out the address, we have the email address for the train site, but you can find the magazines at shop.whiteriverproductions.com. Has links to not just Model Railroad News and HO Collector, but our other, like we have 9 titles now
Sure.
that are monthly or quarterlies: Passenger Train Journal, Railroad Model Craftsman, Rail Fan and Railroad. There's all sorts of things. So shop.whiteriverproductions.com will get you there. And again, look on Facebook for those things. If you have questions about old trains, and a lot of people do, what is this? Or my dad had that, or I found this. I'm happy to answer. You can post them on Facebook or drop me an email.
Sure.
And it's always fun to be able to give somebody an answer to that burning question of, found this in the attic. What is it? How
Yeah.
old is it? And who
Yeah.
made it? So
Yeah, no, that's great.
very,
I'll definitely put all the links to all your publications below, so and we'll go from there. So thanks again, Tony.
thanks for having me.